You've probably heard the phrase, you never truly know someone until you hear what they say behind closed doors. Well, what if I told you that the biggest secrets aren't buried under the surface, but whispered in moments you least expect them? My name is Sarah. For 12 years, I lived in the shadows of my marriage, playing the perfect wife, blending into the background as if I was just a small part of a much larger, more important world. I thought I had a good life. On the outside, everything seemed perfect: a lovely home, a steady job, vacations, and the illusion of happiness. But like most things, it was all an act. Until one night, everything changed. One business dinner, one conversation I wasn't supposed to understand, and I realized just how small I had been made to feel. My husband, the man I thought I knew, revealed everything I needed to know about how he truly saw me. But that night, I also learned something that would change my life forever: that I had the power to choose, the power to rewrite my own story. What you're about to hear is my journey of reclaiming my life, my voice, and my worth. It's not just about what I learned about him, it's about what I learned about myself, and how everything I thought was lost was actually just the beginning of my true awakening. This is my story, and it's one you might recognize more than you think. They thought it was just another dinner, another night where I would play my role as the perfect wife. A woman who smiled, nodded, and remained silent. But what they didn't know was that I understood every word they said, every single word, and what I heard changed everything. It wasn't the first time I'd felt dismissed, but that night I heard something that rattled me to my core. I was sitting there across from my husband David and his business partner Kenji at a high-stakes dinner in a fancy Japanese restaurant. The soft murmur of the conversation drifted to my ears, and I pretended not to understand. I smiled, I nodded, all while listening to the most disturbing truths I was never meant to hear. For 12 years, I had been David's wife. From the outside, our marriage seemed perfect: a townhouse in Mountain View, vacations on the calendar, a steady rhythm of life. But behind closed doors, things were shifting. Slowly, quietly, my husband became absorbed in his work, his travels, and his late nights. And when he came home, it was just business transactions. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Don't forget dinner with the Johnsons. Can you handle the lawn service? He didn't even look at me like a partner anymore. I was just a placeholder, but that night at the dinner table, I realized something. This was no longer just about the mundane routine. This was about the truth of how David truly saw me. The night ended, but the weight of what I had heard pressed on me like a storm. David hummed happily on the drive home, oblivious to the devastation inside me. I remained silent, my mind racing. The truth had been laid bare. My marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I wasn't the partner I believed I was. I was a ghost in my own life, invisible, dismissed. When we got home, David disappeared into his office. He didn't even look back. As I stood there in the living room, I knew something had to change. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen anymore. I reached for my phone and dialed Emma, my college roommate and trusted friend. "Emma, I need a lawyer," I said, my voice trembling but determined. I told her everything: the affair, the offshore accounts, the years of being silenced and dismissed. Emma was quiet for a moment, then she spoke, her voice calm and calculated. "You need to gather everything: bank statements, emails, any proof you can find. Don't confront him yet. We'll plan this carefully." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of power. I wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, I stayed home from work claiming I was sick. David barely noticed. He was too wrapped up in his own world. I went straight to our home office and began my work. Piece by piece, I collected every shred of evidence: bank statements, emails, investment records, everything. I documented it all. Each document I uncovered, each piece of hidden information fueled my anger and my determination. This wasn't just about a betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life. By the end of the day, I had everything. I had proof, solid, undeniable evidence of David's lies, and then I made a decision. I wasn't going to be small, silent, or powerless anymore. I wasn't going to let this man who had dismissed me for so long control my life any longer. I called Emma again. "Everything's ready," I said, my voice steady now, no more trembling. "Tomorrow morning, we serve the divorce papers, and at the same time, we send the evidence to HR. No delays, no mistakes." Emma confirmed the plan. She was already a step ahead. She knew the stakes, and she knew how to handle this. I wasn't going into this blindly. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with strategy, with the plan that would change everything. By the morning, everything was in motion. The next morning, I dressed for work, but I wasn't going to my office. Instead, I headed to Emma's. At 9:00 a.m., the HR department received the evidence package. At 9:30 a.m., the divorce papers were served. I sat in the conference room at Emma's office, sipping coffee, trying to keep my nerves steady. David tried to call over and over, but I didn't answer. His confusion, his panic didn't matter. The truth had been laid bare, and I wasn't going to back down. By mid-morning, confirmation arrived. David had been served. HR had everything. The truth was in motion, and for the first time, I felt alive with the realization that I wasn't small anymore. I wasn't invisible. David's calls became desperate. He left messages filled with confusion, pleading with me, but I didn't pick up. I wasn't going to listen to him anymore. Later that afternoon, Emma and a police officer escorted me back to our house to collect my belongings. David sat there, unshaven and disheveled, his eyes red. He looked like a man who had just realized his entire world was falling apart. "Sarah, please," he started, his voice weak. I held up my hand. "Don't. Just don't. I heard everything, every word at dinner, every plan, every lie. I am done being small." David sank into the couch, speechless. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my own strength. As I stood in front of the door, my heart thundering in my chest, I realized how far I had come. Years of silence, years of feeling small were behind me now. Each step away from David, each item I packed into that car was reclaiming a piece of myself that had been buried for too long. But I wasn't just walking away from a broken marriage, no. I was walking toward something greater, a life where I would no longer be confined by someone else's perception of who I was. I was no longer going to be the woman whose dreams were ignored, whose voice was muffled by the weight of a man's ambitions. I left. That was the first step, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The company was still in motion, still waiting for the repercussions of David's actions. But for the first time, I had control. I held the power. David didn't. He couldn't manipulate me any longer. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind. The divorce proceedings were intense. California law required 6 months before the divorce could be finalized, but every single day of those 6 months was a battle. A battle I was determined to win. David tried to reach out, to explain himself, to beg for forgiveness, but I wasn't interested in his apologies. His excuses were hollow. The man who had discarded me, dismissed me, and used me as a pawn for his own convenience wasn't deserving of my forgiveness, and certainly not deserving of a second chance. The company's in. Investigation into David's actions moved forward. Everything, the offshore accounts, the hidden investments, the affair with Jennifer, was coming to light. The walls he had so carefully built around his secrets were crumbling down, piece by piece. And I was just watching as the man who thought he controlled everything lost it all. His reputation, his job, his life, it was all unraveling right in front of him. By the time the divorce was finalized, I was a different woman. Stronger, more confident. I had walked through the fire and come out unscathed. And what I didn't expect was the unexpected turn my life would take. Kenji, the CEO of the Japanese company from that fateful dinner, reached out to me. His message on LinkedIn was brief, but it carried a weight that none of David's empty apologies could ever compare to. He remembered how I handled myself at dinner, how I remained composed while my world shattered around me. He saw my strength, my intelligence, and my poise under pressure. Kenji offered me a position at their U.S. branch. He didn't just see me as the wife of a businessman. He saw me for who I truly was, a woman with skills, talent, and the ability to thrive. I accepted his offer without hesitation. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but I was going to prove to myself that I could rise higher than I ever thought possible. My career took off in ways I never imagined. I traveled to Japan multiple times, built a strong professional network, and gained respect in an industry that had once been closed off to me. I wasn't David's wife anymore. I wasn't just the woman behind a successful man. I was Sarah. I was someone in my own right, and let me tell you something, there is no feeling more liberating than realizing you don't need anyone's approval to succeed. You don't need to shrink yourself for anyone else. You don't need to be quiet or small or invisible. You are your own person, and you are more powerful than you've ever been told. It wasn't long before my life started to look completely different. I didn't feel like a decoration on someone else's arm anymore. I was carving my own path, one where I dictated the terms. No more apologies, no more compromises. I was finally living for me, and the best part, I had gained the confidence I needed to set boundaries, to say no, to refuse to allow anyone, especially David, to take away what was rightfully mine. I wasn't a small, silent woman anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. David, on the other hand, was falling apart. The financial misconduct he had so carefully hidden was now public knowledge. He lost everything, his job, his reputation, his security, it was all gone. And while part of me felt a sense of justice, the other part of me felt pity, because I had once loved him, but in the end, David's downfall was his own doing. He couldn't control me, he couldn't break me, and as he spiraled, I stood tall, no longer his wife, no longer his silent partner. I was free. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the divorce, it wasn't the betrayal, it was the realization that for so many years I had allowed myself to be invisible, to be something I wasn't. To live a life where my dreams, my desires, my ambitions were secondary to someone else's. But now I understood that I wasn't just Sarah. I wasn't just the woman who had been dismissed. I was someone with a purpose, someone who had the power to rebuild and reshape her life from the ground up. And I wasn't going to stop. If you're watching this and you've ever felt small, overlooked, or dismissed, I want you to hear me loud and clear. You are not weak. You are not too much. You are not meant to shrink for someone else's comfort. Your past does not define. The mistakes you've made do not own you, and no one has the right to crush your dreams. So stand up. Stand up for yourself. Choose yourself. Build a life you deserve, a life that is yours and yours alone. Andy, never forget, you are stronger than they want you to believe. You are more than they want you to think you are. Now, as I reflect on everything that's happened, the pain, the betrayal, the strength I found, I realize that sometimes life has a way of breaking you down so it can build you up, so that you can become someone stronger, someone who can't be touched by the lies and manipulation of others. The world doesn't get to decide who you are, you do. The minute you start living for yourself without fear, without apology, you will see your world change. And when you do, you'll realize you were always meant for more. If you've ever felt small, if you've ever felt invisible, I want you to know something. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. You are exactly who you need to be. The months that followed felt like an awakening. I didn't just rebuild my life, I rebuilt my entire sense of self. No more pretending, no more silence. I was no longer defined by my past, by the choices I made out of fear, or the limits I once allowed others to place on me. I was free, but that freedom came with responsibility. The life I had built in the shadows, the quiet moments spent learning, growing, and plotting my next move, all of it was leading me here. It was leading me to a future I had dreamed of but never dared to believe was possible. Each new project, each new opportunity was a chance to prove not just to the world, but to myself, that I was capable of so much more than I had ever been allowed to believe. And what David failed to see, what he had overlooked in his rush to control, was that the moment he dismissed me was the moment I began to rise. I moved forward, but not without moments of doubt. Every time David called, every time he sent a message pleading for reconciliation, it hit me like a wave. He had been my world for so long. The idea of breaking free was terrifying. But the truth was, I had already broken free the day I decided to take control of my life. Each call, each message was a reminder of how far I had come. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone who couldn't see my worth. The pain wasn't from the betrayal. The pain was from realizing how long I had allowed myself to be invisible. And I vowed that I would never feel that way again, but there was something even more powerful in that moment of liberation. As I stood on my own 2 feet, I saw the world with new eyes. The corporate world, the world of power, influence, and decision-making. It wasn't for the faint of heart. It wasn't for the quiet, for the passive. It was for the bold, the brave, the ones who were willing to step up and take what was rightfully theirs. And I wasn't going to wait any longer. The opportunities were out there. They had always been out there, and now I was ready to seize them. My first project after the divorce was a game changer. It wasn't just a business deal. It was my way of saying, I'm here and I'm here to stay. I took everything I had learned, every skill I had honed in the years I had been forced into the shadows, and turned it into something real, something undeniable. The partners I worked with were impressed. But more importantly, I was impressed with myself. I could do this. I could thrive. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And as each new challenge came my way, I found myself embracing it. It wasn't fear I felt anymore, it was excitement. The future was mine to create, but even as I thrived, I knew that some things would never change. The scars of my past would always be there, but I wore them proudly now. They were reminders of what I had overcome, of who I had become. And in those scars, I found strength. It was no longer about getting back at David or proving something to him. It was about proving it to myself, proving that I could not just survive the worst life had to offer, but emerge stronger and more powerful than I ever thought possible. And then there was the moment when everything shifted. One evening, after months of rebuilding and recalibrating my life, Kenji reached out again. This time it wasn't just a business opportunity, this was different. He wanted to know what my next steps were, how I envisioned my future. I realized something in that moment. The life I had started to build wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had ever felt small, unseen, or trapped. My journey was never just about me escaping my past. It was about paving a way for others to do the same, to reclaim their power, their voice, and their future. The more I grew, the more I realized how many others were out there silently enduring their own battles. Maybe they weren't in toxic marriages like mine, but they were fighting something, a system that didn't see their worth, a world that tried to push them into boxes to silence them. I saw it everywhere, the quiet suffering, the invisible strength, and I knew deep down that my purpose now was not just personal success. It was to help others who felt trapped, who felt like they couldn't breathe under the weight of their own lives. I wanted to be the voice for the silent ones, the ones who were still too afraid to speak up, too afraid to stand tall and say, I am worth more than this. With that realization, I dove into my next project, an initiative aimed at empowering women in the corporate world. I wanted to show them that they didn't have to be silent, that they didn't have to shrink themselves for anyone else's comfort. And I wasn't just offering advice, I was offering the tools to make real, lasting change. This wasn't about charity, it wasn't about sympathy, it was about giving women the resources they needed to reclaim their power and their voices, to show them that their worth wasn't defined by someone else's limitations. As my career continued to rise, so did the impact I had. And every time someone came to me, whether it was for advice, mentorship, or just a listening ear, I felt the weight of my responsibility. My story was no longer just mine. It was a story of survival, of reclaiming power, and of showing others that they could do the same. I wasn't just helping others build their careers, I was helping them break free, free from the chains that had once held me back, free from the lies that told us we weren't enough. As I reflected on everything I had been through, everything I had overcome, I realized that I had never been truly powerless. The power had always been inside me. It was never about what others did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have stayed small, I could have stayed invisible, but I chose to rise, I chose to fight, and in doing so, I found something greater than success. I found freedom, true freedom. So as you sit here listening to my story, I want you to remember this. Your power isn't in the things you have. It isn't in the people who choose to ignore you or the ones who try to put you down. Your power is in how you choose to rise, how you choose to reclaim your life and your dreams. You are not small. You are not invisible. You are a force to be reckoned with. And no matter what you've been through, no matter how many times you've been told you're not enough, remember this, you are enough. You always were. The future is yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone make you shrink or feel small. There's a world out there waiting for you to rise, waiting for you to step into your power. And as you do, know this, the world will never be the same again. Because when you rise, you don't just change your life, you change the world around you. As I moved forward, I started to see the profound shift in those around me. The women I mentored, the colleagues I inspired, they too began to break free from the chains they didn't even realize they had been bound by. It was contagious. Once you witness someone reclaim their power, something inside you stirs. It's like a flicker of light in a dark room. You can unsee it, and you're drawn to it, pulled by the promise of freedom and self-realization. The ripple effect of my transformation became clear. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about creating a legacy of empowerment. It was about showing the world that power doesn't come from being seen or recognized by the wrong people. It comes from knowing your worth and claiming it unapologetically. But even as I stood tall, there were those who still tried to undermine me, to silence me. David wasn't the only one. The world is full of gatekeepers, people who profit off others' fear and silence. But as I had learned, fear only holds power over you when you let it. Once you recognize it, face it, and rise above it, it loses its grip. That's when I realized true freedom comes not from others' approval, but from your own acceptance of who you are and who you're becoming. The world might try to break you down to make you feel insignificant, but once you find your inner strength, there's no stopping you. It was a harsh reality, but an important one. Not everyone will celebrate your success. Some will resent it, some will try to tear you down, but none of it matters unless you let it. As I grew more successful, I learned to filter out the noise, the jealousy, the judgments, the doubts from others. The opinions of people who didn't understand my journey didn't belong in my world anymore. I had learned to listen to the only opinion that mattered, my own. And what I realized is that the opinions of others are nothing but reflections of their own limitations. They criticize what they cannot understand or what they fear. So I stopped listening. And once I did, I was able to truly hear myself. There was a moment months after the divorce when I found myself sitting in a conference room across from powerful men and women. It felt surreal. The woman who had once been invisible, dismissed, belittled, was now commanding respect in rooms where she was once told she didn't belong. But there was no sense of victory in that moment. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was capable, I was worthy. And I wasn't doing this for validation. I was doing it because I had finally learned that my worth is inherent, not based on others' perceptions. That's the true power, realizing that nothing in this world can define you but you. As I looked back on everything, the struggles, the heartbreak, the betrayal, I realized it was all necessary. It wasn't just a story of survival, it was a story of self-mastery, a story of stepping into the life I was always meant to live but couldn't see until I chose to break free from the lies I had been told. And now I stand here not as a woman who was once silenced, but as someone who learned the hard way that no one can take your power unless you let them. If you're listening to this right now, remember, your journey isn't over. This is just the beginning. Reclaim your power. Take control of your life. Break free from the things and people that hold you back. Because once you step into your true power, nothing, and I mean nothing, will ever be the same again.